Stranded on the Red Planet with only the ship's monkey for company, an astronaut must find a way to survive with seemingly no hope of a rescue. Today we find out what the 1960s take on The Martian was, as we check out Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and talk about a sci-fi movie. It's that simple. And on today's show, we've got a Patreon vote winner every month over on Patreon. 3 movies go up in a vote, and we do the winner. It was 3 Mars movies in this case. So the losers were Red Planet and Doom. The winner was Robinson Crusoe on Mars. So we're going classic today. We're doing a 1964 sci-fi movie.
I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit disappointed I don't get to revisit Doom. I have fond memories of that one, as stupid as it may be.
I have never seen Doom, so...
Really? Wow. That's one I have up on you, and I'm not going to count that as a good point.
I was going to say, that's not anything to be celebrated, I don't think, because
Nope.
I've seen Doom and you haven't. So obviously the title makes it pretty clear what the basic premise is. In fact, if anything, it's like, just imagine The Martian, but with obviously less effects,
Yeah.
less plot, and probably more than either of those two, much less science. And that's
Good
Robinson
Lord.
Crusoe on Mars.
This movie, I mean, we'll get to it, but this movie loves to play fast and loose with how does science work?
Yeah.
What are the rules to doing literally anything? Sometimes they'll be like, oh, no, this is super critical. I have to do this. And then like 3 minutes later, they'll be like, whatever.
So yeah, we will start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we go into the spoilers. And of course, before we get started, I'll just say that if you are enjoying the show, please do remember hit the like button on YouTube. Helps us out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can get bonus monthly shows from me and David, as well as other bonuses over on Patreon. But I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. So yeah, astronaut who's supposed to just be orbiting Mars ends up having to do an evacuation because all the fuel on the ship is used up dodging a meteor of some kind, and he ends up stranded on Mars. It's that simple, and he must survive. So
Now, Pete, I guess my first question is,
yes,
are you familiar with the story of Robinson Crusoe just on Earth, like not on Mars?
not really. I mean, I've heard of it.
Okay.
But I have no idea if this is just a broad inspiration of doing this on Mars, or if this is actually following the structure of that original story. I do not know. Do you know?
I was not familiar with Robinson Crusoe going into it. I did a very blanket, like, Wikipedia read, and it does seem to be pretty beat for beat, as much as you can when you have to adapt in sci-fi elements. Like, clearly Robinson Crusoe on Earth didn't have to worry about oxygen. Like, that wasn't a plot point. But
Yes, of course.
for the most part, it follows it pretty, like, one for one the whole way through.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's not really much more to say about premise, so we can just get straight into it. I mean, honestly, I feel like this will be a shorter review than we normally have, just because there's less stuff that happens in it. But, I mean, we'll see how it goes. David, what did you think of Robinson Crusoe on Mars?
I think that this movie had 3 or 4 good ideas spread across it, and it was a chore to get there. And by that, I basically mean the pacing for probably the first hour to 45 minutes of this movie is absolutely just awful. Like, I was so tired watching this, and I was already about to, like, fall asleep, and this movie did nothing to help that. Every once in a while, it would throw out a cool shot. It would throw out, like, a cool idea for, like you said, there's some Martian elements to it where he has a problem. He needs to figure out how to overcome that, and he uses his wit and also just a bit of luck in order to do so. But honest to God, I feel like the plot of the movie doesn't actually start until like an hour into it. And by then, I've already checked out entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a cheesier era of science fiction. This is before the grittier 70s movies kind of really change what sci-fi could be. And I say 70s movies, I'm really starting with 2001, which is 1968. That's really the genesis of oh, we can do sci-fi that's a bit more thoughtful, a bit more gritty, a bit more whatever. And then from there, even Star Wars, which is obviously a lot more family adventure-y, is still a grittier take on sci-fi. But then just a couple of years after that, Alien, in the opposite end of the spectrum, it's gritty, but it's scary sci-fi and it's intense sci-fi.
Right.
This, I think, has some charm to it being like an example of what it was like in movies before that era. But I will say the science does actually make it tough to watch as a modern audience because it's so just fundamental things. Like, I mean, an example is that one of the first things we see on Mars is fire, and the first thought I had was, I thought you needed oxygen for fire. And I actually did a quick Google, is there any natural fire on Mars? I didn't think there was. I was pretty sure there wasn't, but I checked. And sure enough, yes, I was right. There's no natural fire on Mars.
Which, like, again, there are things I'm willing to just forgive for the movie for the sake of sci-fi. Like, you want to have fire on Mars, so be it. That's fine. But this movie keeps on dipping its toes into science. They keep dipping their toes into, like, well, here's how there's fire on Mars. And then they make up some random magical BS to say why there's fire on Mars. So it gets really confusing for the first, like, 30 minutes as to, like, what is actually, like, things I'm supposed to pull in from real world science of, like, what
nothing.
I know.
No, David, let me make this clear.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing in this movie is solved with science. Everything, even if they're pretending it's solved by science, all of it is just fantasy, right? It's all presented in a science fiction package, right? He's talking about it like he's talking about science, but it's not. It's, oh, there's magic food growing here on Mars. There's this magic stuff on Mars.
Yeah.
Everything about it like, because there's no problem solving. Part of, and I don't want to compare it to The Martian because it's really unfair, but
yeah,
I will say one of the key things one of the things that I'll say about The Martian though is that one of the satisfying things about that movie is problem solving. It feels like I'm actually learning something as the character who's very smart is like putting two and two together and figuring out a way to do something with the resources he has. I'm not expecting this to be that. Don't get me wrong. I never in a million years would have expected it to be that, but I think because the only thing it actually has going for it for its first hour, which is over half the movie, is the problem solving, but it's not really problem solving. And then the direction's kind of just whatever. The direction's not exciting. Like, I have no problem with a slow pace, but the direction is not particularly thrilling to make anything that's going on feel like there's something interesting happening. And on top of all that, I mean, it's not like we've got even. Again, not expecting anything interesting or great from the effects in this, right? Because it's from 1964. But I feel like one of the things that could have made all of this a lot more fascinating to watch, even if the science wasn't very good, even if the direction was just so, is that, oh, maybe we'd get some really nice shots. We'd get some really cool imagery of what it's like to walk about on Mars. But the sad fact is that the map paintings in this are some of the most cartoony, simplistic things I have ever seen. There's a moment sort of towards the end of the movie where we're in sort of like more towards like the ice cap sort of area of the planet, and it cuts to like a shot of like the ice caps, like just snowy mountains or whatever, and it looks like a cartoon. And I'm not saying I'm expecting realism here, but there's good map paintings. Sometimes I'll go, hey, that's a map painting, but it looks great. You know, like that is the thing that happens. And this movie does not have. So ultimately, there is some charm. Like, I don't think it's a bad movie, but I do think that time has not been kind to it, and that everything it does, I feel like your average audience member will now know, even if they're not someone who's into science, they'll know that 95% of what they're seeing here is just made up nonsense, and it doesn't have like thrills or a good story to compensate for that, where the science is bullshit, but I can enjoy what the character journey is. I don't think that's really there either. So
no, there's a part like almost exactly halfway through this movie where it starts really diving into the isolation aspect, and I really was getting into it at that point because it starts going into this idea of like, he is a man all alone on an alien planet and he has no idea if he's ever going to be able to escape. And that's intriguing. Like, again, it's unfair to the movie, but The Martian, like, it's that sort of level of character introspection of like, how does someone deal with that? And the movie starts to dive into it, and then all of a sudden it's just like, okay, but in the story Robinson Crusoe, he meets some people, so we're just gonna do that now. And it's like, all right, well, just throw away your one good plot then. I don't care.
Yeah, what's frustrating about that is that's the one thing, because everything else, right? This is made in a time. This is 5 years before the moon landing when this came out, and it's made at a time when your average audience probably would buy a lot of the stuff in this movie because they just don't know about it, right? Maybe it's not as widely known. I have no idea. I expect it wasn't as widely known. A lot of the rules about space and other planets and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, I'm just pulling up right now. In 1964, the thing that was going on was the first satellite, the first geostationary satellite went up into space. So we were, you know what, end of the year, first space flight to carry more than one crewman into orbit. So I think they knew. I think they had a good idea.
Well, I'm saying common knowledge, though. I'm not saying, like, obviously, people at NASA knew like a lot of stuff, but I'm saying common knowledge. I feel like in the years, like even something like 2001, like probably taught a lot of people about some basics about space travel that it just packaged it in a way that was like, oh, hey, this is now more in the zeitgeist now that these certain rules apply. And obviously not all of it's accurate, and over time you sort of learn about NASA being annoyed because movies have propagated certain little things that aren't true, but this is so far removed from any like sense of logic where there is, like I say, there's fire on Mars. There's all sorts of things that shouldn't be found on Mars.
I would say one of the very first thing you see is fire on Mars. The very second thing that happens is after he gets out of his crashed escape pod, whatever you want to call it, he just lifts up his visor and looks around. And I'm not talking like a sun shielding visor. I mean like the thing keeping the air in.
Yeah.
And he's just like, all right, guess I'm on Mars now. And he just puts it back down casually. It's like, all right, man, whatever.
So, like, I think the only real interest I'd say this movie kind of has, because I don't think the story is particularly interesting and it is too slow and nothing really happens for the first hour, is probably just a sort of like snapshot of what a sci-fi movie was before other, better, more defining movies completely changed what science fiction could be. This is a curiosity because it comes from this time when people didn't know as much about. Because I always talk about I don't always talk about it, but I always think about I guess just Trip to the Moon. It's called. It's a short film from like,
here he goes talking about Trip to the Moon again
from like 1910 or whatever this was made. But
yeah.
And I know I first learned of this movie because it's the first entry in the 1001 movies to watch before you die, because they're in chronological order and it's the first one in that book, right?
It's 1902, by the way.
1902, even earlier. There you go, right? Super early stuff. And in that short, they go to the moon and there's people there, right? There's a civilization. And I'm like, yeah, I suppose in 1902, like people just made things up like that because they were guessing, and like for all they knew, there were people on the moon. They didn't know, right?
I mean, I think it's a balance of they knew it probably wasn't true, but at the same time, they wanted some fantastical element to it, you know? Like, they figured most likely, with all of our telescopes and stuff, we would have been able to see some sort of civilization. But it's fun to imagine.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, is no one would do that now. Unless it was like a super surrealist thing, right? No one would ever just say, oh, there's a civilization on the moon that we just didn't notice before, right? Yeah. Right? You wouldn't do that in like a hard science fiction story. And the funny thing is that I feel like for the time period, this is supposed to be a hard science fiction story. And it really is not, like, by today's standards by any stretch. And I don't want to be harsh on it, though, because I think it's commendable enough, like some of the things it's trying to do. And what I was trying to get at there about you bringing up the isolation aspect is that when everything else isn't really holding up because we just know better in a more general sense now. And again, when I say we, I don't mean that no one knew back then. I mean that the common knowledge, all of us laymen's know a lot more about these rules and physics and space travel. Again, I'm not going to pass any tests, but like I know some basics, like don't lift off your helmet in Mars, you prick. Right? So when all that stuff's not working and the directions are far too laid back to really be accomplishing much and the story's not quite there, but one of the things that it could do well is exploring a psychological element, because even if they don't understand, even if the writer of the movie just fundamentally just doesn't know enough and hasn't done the research, one of the things that it could do, and this is something Twilight Zone, which is, you know, airing right alongside this, in fact, this is the final year it was on, I think, if I remember right, they did lots of stories about isolation and like space or in a spaceship or whatever, and the psychological effects that'd have on the people. that's something you can still write about, because you don't really have to know much about space to make that part of it ring true. That part can ring true regardless, because it's more about just him being alone. And
Right.
all the other stuff can be kind of off, but if that part's true, at least, we're just at least exploring an interesting psychological element. But like you say, it's like a 2-minute thing, and then it's thrown out the window, and then we just move on to other things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I also think that this comes down to the issue of just the title of the movie. It's Robinson Crusoe on Mars. You had the original story, which was written back in the 1700s about a man shipwrecked on an island, and you just try to adapt that as much as one-to-one as you can. And it'd be one thing if, like, this were just saying, oh, you know, it's literally adapting it over. Our main character's name is Robinson Crusoe or something like that. But it's not. Like, his main character's name, I think, is Draper.
Commander Christopher Draper.
Yes, exactly. So, like, and not to spoil too much of it, but later on in this movie, he references Robin Crusoe. He says, like, I read this book. I am aware this is part of pop culture in our world. So calling this movie Robinson Crusoe on Mars is kind of the same as, like, calling the Lion King Hamlet in Africa. Like, it's not, but like, that's exactly what they're doing here, and they're just describing the movie.
Yeah, that's not what I thought of the title. What I thought of the title is that this isn't a title. This is just how you're selling it to an executive.
Right.
You're saying,
this is the elevator pitch.
we're going to do Robinson Crusoe on Mars, and then just no one ever thought of a title and said, all right, that'll do. Just put that in the poster.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I think if you like old cheesy sci-fi, there's some stuff here, certainly as like a second screen experience. So you can put this on and do other things while it's playing, and you will not miss anything. Like, I promise you.
It's definitely helpful that this is a very, I kind of want to say, serialized movie. Like, plot is not something that really matters that much. If you pick up on just the general flow of things, then you're going to be fine. It's not any point in it where it's like, here's the development of his character, and you really need to know this moving forward. There's maybe like 3 things that are critical to understanding later parts of the movie, but that's it.
Yeah. That's it though. Like, when we get to the ratings at the end, I'm not going to rate it too low, because I don't think it's like, I don't think it's a bad movie. I just think that it's not really offering a whole lot to an audience now, I don't think, in a way that I think other classic sci-fi movies still do. Day the Earth Stood still holds up, still feels relevant, and feels much more intricate than this movie does. Original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, another example, still holds up, still exciting, thrilling, and just really well directed. I think this is far more middle of the road.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what, like, the message, what the theming of this movie was in terms of, like, what they were trying to impart to the audience. Everything you just listed there obviously still has deeper themes that are relevant today. I don't even know what the theme of this movie was back for 1960s. I feel like it was still just going to be a fun little popcorn flick that's just, like you said, a cheesy sci-fi movie.
Yeah. So, all right, spoilers then, I guess?
I guess, yeah. I got nothing more to say.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, there's one more thing I wanted to say. In doing research for this, just looking up random trivia and such, I found that there's a character called Friday who will be introduced to later on, and he's played by Victor Lundin. And apparently, for some reason, Victor Lundin did a song called Robinson Crusoe on Mars to, like, tie in with the movie, I guess. Please listen to this song. Please go out and find it, because it is so awful. It is so laughably just like, this is maybe the worst song I've heard ever. And I played it on repeat for the past, like, hour. I just love it.
All right, spoilers for Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Let's commence, shall we? Right. Yeah, I suppose one of the interesting things at the very start of the movie, I'll say at least, not the cartoon spaceship that's flying around. You know,
you didn't like their CGI back in 1964?
More hand-drawn generated imagery.
Yeah.
HGI.
The C is Craig. Craig down the hall. He drew that.
Yeah.
It's Craig generated imagery.
But they actually focus on like the other guy on the ship that doesn't make it first. So I thought he was the main character.
Also, he's Adam West, so yes.
Yeah.
I was sitting there like, oh, hey, Adam West is in this movie. Cool. Up, there he goes.
Do you know what? It never even occurred to me that was Adam West.
Yeah. He doesn't seem it. This is 2 years before Batman.
Well, he's just not hamming it up enough.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
He doesn't have enough time to ham it up. He's in it for like 5 minutes and then he just bails.
If he'd done his voice, I'd have been like, oh, that's Adam West. But yeah, like I didn't grow up like being fond of that old Batman show. So
oh no, neither did I.
thing.
But I'm still just aware of what Adam West looked like at the time.
So yeah, there's like a sort of, I guess, a meteor. It's more like a flame ball that's like flying towards them.
Anything you think about space, just stop. It doesn't work like that. If we have a meteor, it's somehow a comet that's orbiting around a singular planet, and just assume that it works in no reasonable way.
Yeah. They at least acknowledge the orbit of the planet, because they say they're now pulled into the orbit, which is a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. They throw out actual science. They say, oh, we're in a decaying orbit. We're going to crash to the planet. We have to like engage the retro thrusters to get back up to a stable orbit. And I'm like, okay, all that's making sense. Sounds good. What next? And they're like, oh, there's oxygen on Mars. Okay, sure, why not?
Yeah, but it's too thin. They have to have like a. So we find out from the main guy, Draper, when he lands. Obviously, he sees this fire. Like I feel like I'm going to summarize the first 30 minutes of this movie in like 30 seconds, because like not a lot happens. But he stumbles around a little bit. He has like whatever supplies he's got from his little like evacuation shuttle that he took down. He stumbles around. He finds a cave, and he deduces that he can breathe for a little bit without the helmet, but he needs a booster every 15 minutes to from his tank.
Yeah, he says that, like, oh, if I'm doing a lot of exercise or something like that, I can last 15 to 20 minutes without my oxygen. If I'm just laying down and relaxing, I can last a full hour. And I'm like, bro, I don't think you know how air works. If it's not present, you're just gonna die.
Yeah, so it's kind of there, and he tries to make a fire. That's like a whole little montage for a bit, is him like try to like get something burning. And eventually gets these kind of like sort of yellow rocks to start, on fire. And he deduces, this is a little bit later, he deduces this, but he deduces that burning these rocks is actually creating oxygen. And that's why he breathes better when he's doing it, because he's actually releasing oxygen into the air.
Yeah. Can I just say there was a really weird edit here that I just couldn't get over?
Sure.
So he brings along this piece of equipment that's basically just for the audience sake of, he can talk into it, and he's doing like captain log sort of things so that he's keeping everyone up to date as to what's going on. And at one point he says, all right, well, by my estimations, I've got enough oxygen to last 15 days. But if you watch his mouth as he says the number 15, and you can hear it also, that's super dubbed.
Oh yeah,
like he did not say 15. He definitely said a single syllable number, and I'm guessing it was like 3, because in the course of the movie he lasts about 3 days and then he runs out of oxygen. So I don't understand why they changed it over to 15 if in the course of the movie it's still only going to be 3.
Yeah, I don't remember what line it was, but I did remember there being a really awkward like dubbed bit of dialogue in this. I don't even think I was paying attention to his mouth in the moment, because my attention was wandering by this point. But I just heard it. I heard it in the sound mix, where it just sounded like a different recording.
Well, unfortunately, I've only got 15 days of oxygen left.
Yeah, basically. That's basically how it sounded. So, yeah, he has to set up a timer for his sleep. He has to sort of he makes like a elaborate alarm system, because if he doesn't wake up after an hour to top up in his oxygen, he'll die. So he has to come up with a little contraption to do that.
Which again, that's it going back. It's solving a problem that I'm like, okay, you've set up the rules here, and it seems like this is a cool solution where he's got like a sand counterbalance thing, and then there's an alarm setting on his little equipment. I like that. That seems smart. And then you immediately counteract it with, oh, the rocks catch on fire now.
And he runs into the next day. He goes looking for his captain, right? Who he's like, oh, he must have landed beyond this ravine. He finds him, but he's dead, right? He's dead. His arms like sticking out the rubble, and he buries him in rocks. He takes whatever he can, and does a bit. I don't know if it's called a funeral, but he, has a moment. He has a moment to say goodbye, and he ends up running into the monkey. Although they treat it like it might be a monster. I don't think you
mentioned the monkey at this point. Have you mentioned the monkey at all?
There was a monkey on their ship. Okay.
You just randomly say, hey, he runs into the monkey. Just forget that.
There's a monkey. But they do a thing where the monkey's tail's sticking out from behind a rock, and he's like, oh God, what is that? There's something on Mars. And I'm like, it's obviously the monkey. It's obvious. They even do another tease when, after he's first crash landed, after a minute he hears like a sound. It sounds like some sort of like big animal, like breathing or something, like a and then he sort of looks around the corner, and he's got like a revolver in the case. Like, why did they bring a revolver?
Pull out a standard ass Smith & Wesson to Mars. Yes, thank you.
How did you think you were going to have to shoot in space?
My favorite idea, though, is that, obviously, guns require some level of oxygen to work because it's all about making an explosion. So I also love the fact that they just assumed there would be enough oxygen to fire off a gun.
Yeah, and, typically they don't let firearms onto, space stations and, ships, because if a hole happens to appear anywhere, it's a big problem.
No, see, that rule was only made in 1967.
Okay.
After they had a Texan astronaut cause some problems.
Entire space crew of this mission died because the Texan had to start doing target practice like a cowboy in the middle of the station. Oh, dear. So, anyway, he finds the monkey. They're teaming up. He's rationing his food and his water with the monkey. At this point, I swear we're 30 minutes in already. I seriously, we have covered a lot of time.
He finds Adam West and gets the monkey at 30 minutes in. So we are a full 30 minutes into this movie. And again, all that's happened is we have a minor problem, we solve the minor problem, we get a new problem. And we just keep doing that over and over again until we get to the actual real main plot of the story an hour in.
No, I'll disagree with that. That's not what's happened so far. He's had one problem that he's kind of solved. Otherwise, all he's done is sit and list all the problems that he has on the microphone. Yeah. He's not been solving things. He's just been sitting explaining everything to the audience.
Yeah. Also, I guess what I was kind of hoping for in this intro scene is back in the original Planet of the Apes. You know how they did a whole sequence of showing the Forbidden Zone and all the things that happened out there and why it was so scary and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of hoping for that sequence, but then all we got was 3 fireballs, and then he finds this cave, and then they just decided, it's easier just to stay in the cave. So we don't really get that much exploration of Mars until much, much later in the movie. Oh, yeah,
I actually forgot. Yeah, he goes looking and he almost gets hit with a fireball. Because again, there's this random fire kicking about on Mars. Yeah. So the monkey keeps not taking water. And he's like, that's weird, but he doesn't think much of it until he eventually realizes, wait, this little bastard's got a water source. That's why he's not taking any of my water. So I'm going to have to follow him to the water source. So he intentionally gives him a cracker or something to get his mouth all dry. And he's like, all right, come on, let's go.
At this point, it's also been 3 weeks. He's set up a full house. He's got a sign outside his door saying
that's right,
mission control. He's got an American flag hanging outside.
I rolled my eyes so much at that. It's such an old school movie American thing. Is oh no, he's going to die in 3 weeks, but he's going to put up the American flag just in case anyone finds him in the future.
Listen, nobody ever landed on Mars before, so you bet your ass he's planting that flag for America.
So he follows the monkey to this magical cave that has a pool of water.
Mm-hmm.
Just and not only that, it's growing. And wait for me to say this. It's growing sausages. There's a plant that is growing sausages that not only is all right to eat, and he quite likes it, but the sort of the stems of said plant are also good for weaving, so it's also going to be allow him to make like fabrics and clothes as well.
Oh God. You know what I love most about this character?
Uh-huh.
Again, going back to the Martian, how he was a plant guy. Like he was the
Mm-hmm.
biologist sounds wrong, but I think it might have just been biologist. Botanist, that's it. He had an interest in that sort of stuff. This dude, he specifically says is US Navy, which means he has discovered water on Mars and actual honest to God life on Mars.
Plant alien life, yeah.
He doesn't give a damn. He couldn't care less. He has no care for the massive, like, oh my God, this changes everything about how we thought about life in the universe. Like, nah, I just want a sausage plant. That's all.
That's because he doesn't really have that much of a character. Like,
Yeah.
can you tell me anything about this guy other than that he's stranded on Mars and trying to survive?
He has an unhealthy obsession with Adam West in, like, a lot of ways.
I don't know if that counts, but yeah, okay. So yeah, he's found all this stuff. Happy days. He's surviving quite readily on that. He's going out and checking his little reader to see, because basically the ship they left is still orbiting the planet, so he sees it going by and he tries to remote control it, but it doesn't work. But he can see it every so often. It'll go past his location, and he comments that it's like soul destroying because it's like a supermarket up there with all the supplies on it, and he can't get to it. So it's breaking his heart every time it goes past.
I think at this point it's been, I think he explicitly says like 4.5 months or something like that. So he's
been a
full
while.
already surviving on this planet.
Yeah, because this is when he has
already said.
This is when he has the dream where Captain McCready shows up silent, but he shows up like a zombie and just sort of stands there and stares, and he's like, "McCready, it's you. What? You're here, McCready. Come on, McCready, talk to me." And then, I mean, the way they come out of it's okay, because the little alarm that he's made kind of wakes him up, and he realizes that he's standing there asleep, and this is all just a dream. I'm okay. That's an okay way to like break him out of it. Admittedly, I don't know what I was expecting out of like the raw psychological exploration that this was going to do, but it's an okay little scene.
That's the thing. This is where it just starts to dip its toes into it, because we get the 4 months have passed. He explicitly has that dream. Mind you, I think he has that dream after he tries cooking the sausages for the first time, and he's like, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that," and he feels like he has food poisoning or something.
Oh yeah, he makes like a stew. That's right.
But as he has that dream about McCready, and then when he comes out of it, he starts recording and saying like, "I was in an isolation tank to like prepare for this. Like I was in that for 2 months, but the difference is." I always knew I was coming out of that. I always knew that I was going to be able to leave. I don't have that to look forward to here, and I am losing my mind. And I love that little, like, where that begins for this character, because after this scene, I feel that. I feel that coming through the writing. Like, he uses, like, his oxygen tanks to just start playing bagpipes as he marches with his monkey across the Martian landscape. Like, I would love to see this deeper dive into how his character is losing his mind, but we immediately, very next scene, have him discover other people on Mars, so it just goes right out the window.
Well, he doesn't discover people yet. He sees spaceships. We get a whole thing with them first before we get to people.
The first thing he discovers is a grave. He discovers a strange stone standing up, and he sees bones underneath.
Okay, first of all, before we go too far ahead, I do want to say the whole Silent McCready thing, I think, is a bit of foreshadowing, because it's the idea that he's going to meet someone that can't speak. So I think that's teasing what's to come. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Secondly, after we get his little montage of him playing bagpipes with his tank and whatever else, I think at one point he starts shouting into like a ravine to hear the echo. And he's like, "Please say something back." And it's like, "Please say something back." No, reply to me. Reply to me. Reply to me. So you can see that he's getting lonely. He's getting desperate. He wants to hear a voice. When he finds this body, though, right? I thought they made such a stupid decision here, because this body he finds, the hand is sticking out the rubble the exact same way that Adam West's hand was sticking out the rubble earlier on, to the point where I didn't get this was like a new body he found. I thought he just went back to him I was sitting going, oh man, like his flesh deteriorated. I mean, but that's actually one of the few things in the movie where I'm like, well, if that was Adam West's body and it's deteriorated, I'm like, yeah, maybe the Martian atmosphere would do that in 4 months. I don't know. Maybe it would be harsher. Maybe it would, I don't know. But obviously it clicked after a bit because obviously you see this metal bracelet on the hand of the skeleton, which is just a skeleton. There's nothing else there. It's just a skeleton and this bracelet over the wrist. Obviously, once we see other characters with these bracelets, I was like, oh, okay, I get what they were doing there. This wasn't him going back to the grave to, basically talk to Adam West's dead body. This was him finding something new. But I don't think that was immediately clear to me in the scene.
I get what you're saying, and on a cursory glance, I agree, but I think that it's based off of his reaction to finding it, because he's very, frantically trying to dig it out and all that, so I feel like he wouldn't be reacting to that if it were Adam West.
Yeah, I mean, that is fair. That is fair. But having just the exact same hand sticking out of rubble, there just happens to be a skeleton hand instead of a flesh hand.
Right.
I think was a really weird choice. Like, have a different thing sticking out, or have it just found in a different circumstance.
I mean, I'll go ahead and say here, I get 60s, we got Star Trek going on and all that stuff with just rubber foreheads. I think they shouldn't have gone humanoid, or at least changed it up slightly, because then it would really make these bones. You show a weird shaped bone or something like that, and you immediately get that, oh, this was a dead alien. That's all you needed here.
Yeah.
But instead we get absolutely just a human skeleton.
This is pre-Star Trek just by a little bit, actually, I think.
Okay, but I'm just, the era.
Yeah. I mean, we're right at the end of Twilight Zone. We're just a couple of years before Star Trek, I think, in the timeline of the 60s. And both of which obviously are far more influential in science fiction than this movie is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so he then sees a bunch of spaceships showing up, right? And we get these and honestly, these spaceships, well, they are pretty cheesy. They're probably the most advanced and best looking effect in the movie, because at least there's some design effort went into them.
You say that, but I'm 95% sure that I've read that they were just taken from War of the Worlds or something like that.
Same director made that movie, so it wouldn't surprise me.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that doesn't change what I said. That's still true. It's just...
No. The design went into it, but the design went into it for a different movie.
No, I get that, but I'm saying it stuck out compared to everything else in this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. My primary problem though is they got 4 shots. They have exactly 4 ways that these ships can move on screen, and yet they want to show them no less than 40 times.
Yeah, they start blasting into rocks, and obviously he's whatever. But ultimately what happens is that he runs into this guy who he eventually names him Friday, right? But he runs into this guy who, again, just looks human. They're just humans. But, but he obviously is wearing something different. He's got these 2 metal bracelets on, and when he gets back to the cave with this guy and they run from the alien spaceships firing things, he looks at the footage that he picked up on his camera that he left monitoring the area, and he sees more people like him wearing the bracelets, but he also sees spacemen. I mean, I say spacemen, I mean they have helmets on. That's it, right? And it looks like these people that have got the bracelets on are slaves, and that these bracelets are sort of controlled to because basically whenever they turn on their signal, they sort of clasp together like magnets and kind of force them to get, I don't know, submissive, I guess. But it's he puts 2 and 2 together. He's like, okay, you're a slave and you've ran away and I found you, and okay, so we're going to be friends now, maybe.
No. His breakdown of that situation is, oh, you're a slave? That's cool. Now you're my slave, or I'm going to turn you back over to those bad people. And he is just 100% enslaving this dude and trying to get him to speak English. Wait,
did he say that?
I'm almost directly. I want to see, I'll see if I can find the exact line here, but as soon as he realizes that that dude's a slave, he just immediately says all right, get over here. You belong to me now.
Honestly, in some ways, he's far too trusting of this guy, even though he does take a knife to bed with him, right? And he's obviously wakes up and he's suspicious of him when he moves up. Because basically this alien dude I'll just call him Friday because that's what he ends up calling him.
Yeah.
Named after a character in Robinson Crusoe, hence the referencing you were mentioning earlier. But
Yep.
Friday comes over and starts messing with his alarm thing, and like this gets him kind of angry. So he holds a knife up to him and says, "Hey, don't touch this. Like, like you're okay here as long as you don't touch anything. Like, don't make trouble." But so they sort of like sell that it might be tense for a while. And the sad part of this is that there's absolutely better movies, science fiction or not, which is about someone communicating with another person or maybe an animal perhaps that cannot talk back, that do not trust each other, and you get a great arc, a story of how they learn to trust each other, how they bond, how one maybe does something nice for the other and they become bonded and it becomes into this friendship where they can almost like know each other without ever saying a word or whatever it may be. Like there's other versions of this story absolutely in cinema that are so good. This, however, this mistrust is just gone. Like in the next couple scenes, he's just got him picking up stuff, and he's like, "Okay, you're going to let me speak English, so rock. This is rock." And
he's like, he has some other word for it. And rather than trying to learn his language at all, which we do get a bit of character development on that, rather than learn his language at all, he's just like, "No, you stupid idiot. I said stone."
He also tries to point up and say, "Hey, where are you from?" And he points to Orion's belt. He's like, "Oh, you're from the middle star of Orion. I'm from just round the corner over that way." And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. He's saying he's from a solar system where the star of his solar system is the middle of Orion's belt. I don't think that feels close by to me, conceptually speaking. Mars and Earth are close by to each other in comparison, sure. But
also, I love how he pointed up in the sky and was like, "I'm from right over there." And we see a shot of space, and it's not, the sun. Like, it's not, it's just a random ass other star.
Yeah, he points at it as if he's pointing at a star system, but I'm like, no. We're already close by the star of the star system we're in. So you can't just point up to a group of stars and say, "I'm in that vague direction."
Nah. And I do like, though, that this points out that these people were brought into Mars, and like the entire thing that was going on is essentially just a mining expedition. So there aren't actually any Martians. They're just aliens coming and visiting Mars.
Yeah, the aliens want resources of some kind. Who knows what? Some of these fancy yellow rocks that burn oxygen.
Yeah, fire rocks, whatever. Oh, that was another thing. We have Friday. He's got a little pouch full of M&Ms, and apparently they give him oxygen. Like you eat one and then it gives you oxygen.
Yeah, we don't find out till later though, because he tries to offer them to Draper, and Draper turns them down. And it's not until he's like desperate later where he like Friday insists, and then he realizes, oh wait, that this is my oxygen boost, right? This is actually, I don't know how they work, these magic beans, but somehow they release oxygen straight into the bloodstream. Yeah. I'm like, okay, see, again, just fantasy. It's just made up bullshit.
But again, like, it's fantasy, but then they try to explain it. They try to give that little thing of like, yes, you see it does something with the bloodstream, and it does, instead of just saying like magic pills, don't question it. They try to give that tiny little bit to sink it into reality.
Yep. So the plot of the movie at this point kind of becomes this idea that the alien captors, the slavers, are going to keep coming back. And every time that they fly nearby, the signal sets off the bracelets and his hands go together. And they're like, shit, they're going to keep coming back. We have to do something about that. They try saw off the bracelets off. They actually get one off eventually. He sort of wires through it over time. But it becomes this thing where they're going to keep dropping explosives. We're going to have to move and try and find, something else. We're going to have to get away from them. So ultimately it becomes this journey of like trying to go to the north to get to the ice caps.
Yeah. Also, they have a sequence where Friday revisits his like tribe area where the rest of his family was, and they've all been killed and left for dead. And then that's when the aliens like try bombing them, and Friday saves Draper's life. I keep on wanting to call him Crusoe because like that's should be his name.
But... You got something wrong there though, just to correct something there.
Yes,
they don't get bombed. The meteor, like,
that's right,
fires, like it comes overhead, and I think it's meant to be ash that comes down. It's like black snow.
That makes sense. I kind of forgot that because I remember thinking, why did the meteor just explode all of a sudden?
Yes. And obviously it's not really a meteor because it's in the orbit. Like, but that's what they call it at one point. So
I guess at that point it technically would be either a moon or a comet, depending on definitions here.
yeah. So yeah, he basically gets buried in the black snow that's coming down, right? And I say that, and the reason why I'm not calling it ash outright is because it doesn't actually look like ash. I'm just saying I think it's supposed to be that, but it doesn't look like that. It's probably asbestos. Let's be honest. So
there is a point, because like you said, we eventually make our way up to the polar ice caps. There is a point where they show the monkey like trying to swim its way through the snow or whatever.
Yeah.
That is asbestos. Like, there is no way that monkey did not inhale a pound of asbestos during that scene.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Back in the day, like, it was used for fake snow and things. So, not out of the realm of possibility that that's what happened here. But, yeah, so, yeah, he gets buried under the ash, and effectively, our man Friday has to pull him out and give him one of his oxygen pills, which, brings him back. And he's like, oh, thank you, you saved my life. So, this is kind of that Bond moment. But to go back to, like, finding the dead, like, slaves here, because, like, the idea being that the bad aliens just kind of say, there's no point in carting these slaves all the way back to our home planet, we'll just kill them here and be gone. Like, we really could have used Friday as a character, could have really been developed here a bit by reacting a bit more to this. I mean, he does react a bit, but, like, he should be down on his knees, probably breaking down in tears. This should be something. There should be something tangible here that we can get across, and maybe like the first real sympathy that comes from Draper, who again it's been kind of like a weird one-sided "you're going to help me" kind of relationship. Maybe this is the first time he could like sort of say that he needs to do something for him. Like, he has to sort of give something back, and maybe that's comfort. Maybe that's like a moment to mourn, whatever it may be. I don't know, but something.
Yeah. I mean, I would have been fine with it either way on Friday's side, if either he showed intense emotion about it, or if they went that like
catatonic kind of thing.
Well, not even catatonic, like the weird like space shaman thing, where it's like, our culture believes they're one with the universe and blah blah blah, or something like that. Any sort of reaction at all. But he showed nothing. All he did was explain to Draper that they were left behind because they were cattle, and then the meteor hits. Yeah, but he's not given any time to do anything. Yeah,
but what you suggested there implies adding lore to this. I'm saying even without that, you don't need to add anything. You don't have to explain that he's got his own culture. Obviously, he should have and must do, but you can do either he's in such shock that he's just not responding to anything, he's just in a daze, or he shows intense emotion, breaks down, cries, gets angry, whatever it may be. Right. You don't have to explain anything with those two, but they both work and at least show that he cares and show that he's really affected by it. But we get neither.
Don't get me wrong, Draper definitely should have done something, like anything, to show that he had any sort of bonding at this point. But again, Meteor's here, so that scene just stops dead, and they have to focus on surviving the ash.
Yes. So they go on their journey. We've got them like climbing up, like it's like underground caverns, but there's like caves that they're climbing up, and they're trying to like sneak underneath the ground so they don't get spotted by the aliens. But then they just kind of hit a wall where there's like fire, and they're like, well, we can't keep going this way, so I guess we have to go up top.
Okay, so there's a weird little editing bit here. So throughout this entire movie, they specifically show that the reeds and stalks of these sausage plants, Draper's got a loom, and he is making some sort of fabric out of these reeds. Okay, fine. That's in the background. You can do that. But they specifically show these two just wearing the same outfits they have always been wearing this entire time. They're climbing across these cliff faces, and Friday says, like, this way is okay, let's go. They show a shot of the aliens, and then the next time we see them, they are in full, like, garb. He has a hat. They both have tunics, and it's just never mentioned why they have this stuff now.
Yeah, also, I'll go back just for a second here and mention that his like device that he keeps recording on and like sending signals out on also has like a screen in it, right? Which is fine because it's got the radar on it whenever the ships show up, and that makes some sense. But he also has like videos in there that he can play, because he plays back like a scientist at one point because he wants help. Like, how do I find water? Like, he's getting close to running. This is before obviously the monkey thing with the water. And we spend like 2 minutes listening to the scientists talk about, finding water, that's the tough part. And where do you find water on what seems to be a barren planet? Oh, it's tough to say. No one knows for sure because no one's ever landed in one. Maybe there's some in some rocks, but that's all I can do. I'm like, if you're going to have him sit and watch this, like, have the scientist explain something. Well, if there is water, it would be deep in a cave or something. You know, so at least give the character a direction to go in, so it feels like there was a reason to watch this damn thing. Instead, the main character just kind of goes, "That was a big help, Doc. Thanks," and turns it off. And I'm like, well, what was the point of that scene then?
Yeah, I mean, if they played it up for the idea of like he is truly hopeless or something like that, fine, but it didn't come across that way. It just came across like a time waster. My favorite line from it, though, was the doctor saying, "Well, water is where you find it." Yeah, Doc. No shit. Really?
And if there's any oceans, don't drink from that. Seawater's bad for you. I'm like, it's Mars. I think if there was oceans, you might have noticed them in a few telescopes by now.
No. See, I like that part of the video because they realized they didn't want to go back and record it numerous times. So they're just doing a blanket thing for all possible future planets they might ever visit. They're like, oh yeah, if we ever get to Europa or whatever, don't drink the water. It's probably salty. Also, don't drink your own piss. He explicitly says that. He's like, no urine either. That's not a good thing.
So we get them growing more weak. They even put it down the monkey at one point. The monkey can walk. We're getting to the ace caps. There's a whole thing here where Friday is like pretending to take his oxygen pills, but he's actually just giving them to Draper to save him. And Draper eventually realizes this when Friday gets weak, and he's like, "Wait a minute, you've been shortchanging yourself to save me. I'll not have that. You take one," which I guess is like the most nice thing he's done for him up until this point.
Yeah,
to be honest.
at this point he's also cut off both of the bracelets, or at least he's about to. So he is friends with him in a certain extent, like, but only in they say they're friends. We don't actually get to see that develop in any meaningful way.
Well, to be fair, there's one moment before they have to like abandon where they live for the explosions and stuff. There's a moment where Friday like comes up behind him and like jokingly either tickles him or like pretends to push him, and then they look at each other and just start laughing like oh, aren't we cute? Oh, we're two peas in a pod.
Maybe I'm just a weak little baby man, but that was the only time like I was kind of half paying attention during that sequence, and then all of a sudden he jumped out and I actually jumped. Like I was like, oh geez, what's happening? And then they just play it up for like a ha funny joke, right? And I'm like, what grown man is doing this? What's going on here? This doesn't seem like a friendly moment. This seems like they realized there was no tension for the past 20 minutes and they just had to throw something in.
I'd argue longer than 20 minutes, to be honest.
Yeah.
So they get to, the snowy ice cap area of Mars. And at this point, we're shockingly, near the end. We see the spaceships fly over at least once more, I think. But by and large, this movie just builds up to a complete Deus Ex Machina ending where, it's like, oh, there's a ship signal on the thing. And then somehow Friday's like, no, not the bad people. This is different. And then you just hear over the radio a human voice be like, oh, we're coming over Mars, blah, 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 blah. Right? And he's like, oh, it's people like me. And he starts talking to them like, oh my God, it's the voice of Mars. So the end of this movie is just a shot of them looking out at the snowy ice caps of Mars. Again, very sort of really simplistic, cartoony, like map painting with them just off to the side. And it's just this happy ending of, oh, he's saved, I've come back for him. And yeah, I really cannot comment enough just how little like tension or like drama or stakes there is throughout this entire movie. Everything is so like honestly, it's funny that we did not too long ago It Came From Outer Space, and that was one of the complaints we had in that, is that it never felt like there was any, and I think that maybe had a better job of it than even this did, to be honest, in some ways.
Oh yeah, well it's because this It Came From Outer Space had a forward goal. He wants to get back to his own time. It has nothing outside of general survival, and even if you look at it through that lens, like this whole last bit where they're trekking to the North Pole, I don't think either of us gets a full grip on why do they feel that's necessary. Why do they feel that we have the reason in the movie is to get away from these alien guys, but like there's no reason to say they can't follow up to the North Pole And there's no reason to say why they couldn't just stay in the underground area either. It just feels like they have to be here because they wanted to have the final sequence take place in snow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of these things where there's no real driving force to the plot. Which is weird because a survival movie, that should be the easiest thing to do. Have him scared that he's about to run out of oxygen. Have him like think of a solution. Have like, and if okay, maybe you get away with one or two like miracle things that he finds, right? But you can't overdo it. And I think the problem is that so many of his problems are solved by, oh, secret water, oh, secret food, oh, other people on Mars. Like just everything just keeps being given to him. So it doesn't feel like the character's accomplished anything at any point during the movie. We don't explore the isolation element and how he gets over that psychological idea of it. I mean, if you wanted this to be a movie about two people who can't communicating, I'm thinking back to this is not original Star Trek, this is Star Trek The Next Generation, but there's a fantastic episode of that show where Picard is stranded with an alien and they don't understand each other. And the whole episode, barring a little bit of a subplot of like the others try to find them and like help them, is them trying to communicate and Picard try to understand how this alien speaks, right? And by the end of the episode, he gets it and it clicks. But that's what it is. It's the challenge of trying to figure out each other and how to like work together potentially. And that episode is so superior to this movie because one, that is clearly the focus of that episode. That's what it wants to be, right? It doesn't do the survival thing first because that's not what it's about. But
yeah,
this spends an hour doing survival stuff and not well. So. Like, I feel like you know, audiences were probably quite short-changed in this time period for science fiction. I feel like, yeah, obviously Twilight Zone was on TV, but the atomic 50s era sci-fi had cooled down a little bit. That, you know, that we're in the 60s now. We weren't quite at the Renaissance in the way that 2001 changed everything again and made everything go in a completely new direction and was more exciting. We're in this kind of no man's land between those things where, oh, the space race is kind of heating up and people are interested in that, so let's do a movie that ties into it, but it feels very uninspired with every single decision it makes. So
I mean, that's I'm looking at the original Robinson Crusoe wiki page, and the thing that's getting me the most is that apparently the original story, it was a 35-year section of his life. He was in 1651, he got shipwrecked. He managed to escape and come back in 1680 something. So it's 35 years. And that's the sort of level that I think is kind of required here. Like, in this movie, I didn't feel like you were saying there were any sort of stakes or there was any sort of problems that were like insurmountable. And I think what it really came down to is, like you said, he got them all solved so quickly. And then anything that would have been a longer term problem, like sustainability of the sausage plants or the monkey dies or anything like that, he was only there for like 4 or 5 months. At least that's how much it feels like. Me, obviously, it took some amount of time to teach Friday English, but it doesn't feel like it took more than 2 months.
Yeah, and obviously, we've compared it to The Martian. You could compare it to something, again, to go with the island thing, like Castaway or something like that. Like, you can compare it to those kind of things. It really should feel more like an Odyssey. If he's got, you know, it feels like he's been here a long time and he's had to learn to survive, like, down to, like, the nitty-gritty so that he can be here for a long time. The idea that almost you could do a thing where, like, when the possibility of leaving comes, like, maybe he's even scared of leaving because he's been here for so long, like a prisoner who's scared of being back in the outside world. Like, can I even function around other people anymore? Yeah, kind of thing. Like, there's ideas you could explore, there's things you could do, but I feel like this movie is not interested in exploring any particular ideas. It just kind of wants to go through the beats and get to the end and give kind of a happy ending that just comes out of nowhere. Like this was never a movie that was going to have the balls to leave him stranded on Mars and leave it in a sort of ambiguous, like, downbeat note. It was never going to do that. But it's not even like he's actively trying to, like, find a way to boost his signal or anything like that. I don't even think he even talks about it. Like, it's like, oh, I wish I could, like, radio for help, but no one's close by enough. Like, everything's too far away, it wouldn't work or something like that. He never really talks about it.
Right. There's the part where he, once he finds the grave, he realizes that the person who was buried was murdered because there was, like, a hole in the skull or something like that. So he then removes every trace of, like, he takes down the American flag. God forbid he does, but he removes every trace of himself, and then he blows up the ship because the ship is still in orbit. It's going over top. It doesn't have fuel to get down, but he does have a self-destruct button, and he destroys it. And from that point on, it doesn't feel like he has any purpose or drive. It doesn't, because all of his problems have already been solved. He's surviving just fine. So it has nothing to do with escape anymore. This is just a day in the life for this guy from the beginning to end of this movie.
Yeah, the only problem at that point is the fact that he's alone and what that'll do to him, and then he's just given a person. He's like,
Right.
here's this guy that you're going to name Friday,
Yep.
and that's it. So he just keeps being given things as opposed to actually solving anything.
And that's why I'm saying it feels so serialized. It feels so much like, well, this is the block. Here he is presented with a problem, and then the solution comes at the end of the block, and then that's it. We move on. We carry on to the next problem. And it's not something where there is this overarching issue. It's just segment by segment the whole way through.
Yeah, and obviously, yeah, it might be realistic for him to just accept that there's no real hope of ever being rescued. But if that's the case, then tell that bleak story. Tell me what that does to him. Tell me what drives him to keep going, and probably be subtle about it as well, because he shouldn't really be saying that much out loud. That should be a very visual show don't tell type of story for the most part. Maybe you can have him talking to the monkey a bit to give us a little bit of dialogue and some things explained.
Yeah.
But for the most part,
I mean,
it should be more subdued than that for sure.
yeah, even Castaway had a Wilson. You can talk to inanimate characters. He's got a literal captain's log he can talk into. I'm down with him talking, but it is, like you said, there is a couple of matte paintings and stuff like that are pretty crappy, but beyond that, there's no real visual flair to this movie. There's nothing that is coming across as I had a vision for Robinson Crusoe in space.
It's also not really got the sets and the props to even do things that visually. Everything feels like a classic Star Trek episode TV set to an extent, where even if you wanted to show him doing something intricate, you probably couldn't, because your props just aren't designed to be able to do it. And I think that kind of hampers it as well. Everything feels too simple in that respect. And obviously Star Trek gets around that because it has more philosophical problems. It has more problems to deal with morals and characters making decisions and what's the right thing to do in this situation. It finds its strengths in other place. So the dated elements of Star Trek's production from a 60s TV show don't really hold it back all that much. Obviously, it's nice when some of the later shows are able to do something a bit more visually interesting with it, but fundamentally, the core thing that made it work still works today. The problem with this is that when you take away what might have looked at least a little impressive in 1964, I don't think there's a whole lot left to appreciate about it, other than just a window into what a movie like this was like in 1964. If you're interested in, film history, science fiction history, and you want to see some of the different things that were done at the time. But that's
Also,
pretty much it.
there was one bit that I wanted to bring up earlier, and we just kind of skipped by it. He's the worst to the monkey. If I could just go back to the point where we are introduced to the monkey's got on a little spacesuit of his own with his own little mini oxygen tanks. And at this point, Draper's already run out of oxygen. So as he finds the monkey, the very first thing he does is take off the monkey's helmet because, of course, and then he takes the monkey's oxygen and says, I need this more than you do. And he just starts huffing it. And it's not a big tank. It's a very small oxygen tank, but I'm just dude, come on, that was the monkey's oxygen. And I don't think at any point in this movie do they actually give the monkey any more oxygen. No, I guess he's just able to breathe on his own.
He just keeps living with no explanation. I guess because he's burning the rocks that release oxygen, that's enough for the monkey. He doesn't need any more.
Sure, but even then, he mentions how he tried to give water to the monkey and the monkey wasn't having it. And okay, fine, but at a certain point, are you not worried that the monkey is about to die? It seems like every turn we make here, he's just screw that monkey. I'm going to feed it salty foods just so it gets extra thirsty, despite the fact that I don't know if it's drinking at all, because screw that monkey.
I mean, it's almost like there was no attempt to make this character likable.
No. No, there was not. Also, this is just a little personal thing. It happens in the original Robinson Crusoe, so I get why they did it here. But there's a point where he's walking back to his cave with Friday, and he just starts reciting the Lord's like prayer or like some passage out of the Bible. He's just like, "Oh, the Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want." And then later on in the movie, they have a discussion about God or whatever, and they share their own stuff. The movie does it fine. It's not beating you over the head with it. It's really just those two scenes. Apparently, in the original Crusoe, one of the major things he does as he's teaching Friday English is also converting him to Christianity. So I'm kind of happy that Draper didn't convert a Martian to Christianity, because that would just be a bridge too far. But I don't know why they took the time to put in that little nod to it either way, because it doesn't end up doing anything.
I remember he's not Martian. He comes from
Right.
Orion's belt.
They named the star specifically. I think it's like Enlipidian or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know that, but like whatever. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is one of these movies where like half an hour in, I'm like, oh god, this is going to be a quick discussion because like nothing's happened in the last 30 minutes.
Yep.
Oh dear. So yeah, it's a weird one. I feel like the fact that Criterion put this out at one point, I feel like it was mostly just like a matter of, oh, we can have access to it because MGM are willing to give us like a big bit of their library, because they've put out other MGM stuff like Michael Mann's what do we call it? Oh god. Oh, with James Caan, Michael Mann.
Hold on. James Caan. Thief?
Thank you. I knew it began with a T, and in my head, I'm like, what's that? It's my favorite Michael Mann movie, and somehow it was escaping my brain. They put that out. They've put out like we did It's a Mad World in the Criterion show. That was an MGM release. So MGM basically a lot of their classic movies they just let Criterion put out for a while. So I wonder what extent of that was just, oh, we could put this out, so why not?
Yeah. This seems like one that they had a more lengthy debate on at the Criterion offices. They were like, do we? All right, whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, all that said, I don't think it's like a terrible movie by any means.
No. I think you said it best at the very beginning. It's cheesy and very of its time, but like, it's only bad looking back on it so far removed. I think in just viewing it objectively of how it was made, it's a perfectly okay movie. It's just got some pacing and writing issues to it.
Yeah, and a lot of its ideas, in terms of like how things work in the movie, just feels so painfully dated if you have any basic understanding of space or what Mars is like, and and again, maybe that was less common knowledge at the time, so you get away with it in 1964. But yeah, in a world where you've seen lots more science fiction, even if you don't know the science directly, if you've just seen a lot more science fiction movies, a lot of this just feels like really like dated because of that. So yeah, all right, David, what are you rating Robinson Crusoe on Mars?
I mean, I went into this, I knew I was giving it above a 5 because it, like we were saying, it's just not bad. Like it's not beneath that point. That being said, I wasn't sure how many points up I was going to go. I was honestly just hoping that like we came into this review and you'd be able to point at some stuff and say like, oh, this has a deeper meaning. And I'd be like, oh, okay.
I mean, I'm sorry to disappoint you, David, but I was not getting a lot of deeper meanings in this.
Nah, I get that. So overall, I think I'm only going to come up to a 6. I think that it, like you said, the cheesiness to it does have some fun. It is still like got some craftsmanship behind it to some extent, but like barely, just barely is it actually there. So I can't fathom going above a 6 really.
I do wonder how much more positive I'd feel on it if it was just like edited down to like really speed it up a little bit. Like I actually was a little bit late to the recording because I started the movie thinking it was going to be 90 minutes long, and it's an hour 50. And I feel like if you just trimmed out like 20 minutes to make everything a bit more brisker, I feel like I might be more positive because at least it'd be going through everything it's doing quicker.
Here's what you do. You take out all the shots of the goddamn alien spaceships that are just the exact same shots over and over again. You just use the sound effect, which is also copied over and over again. Because then we at least know what it means. We don't have to see it visually every single time. That saves you 5 minutes.
Aye, but they like the shots of the other spaceship. He's like, I'm proud of that. I want to use them again.
I mean, to be fair, the first time it shows up, I was like, oh, okay, no, this is cool, because they're like zooming around really quickly, and that's not something you see a lot of this time. Usually it's just like models moving slowly across the screen, but then they just kept doing it.
Yep. What do I want to give it? I feel it. I definitely don't think it's any higher than a 6. I think 6, but I feel like I think I want to go to 5.5, and the reason why I'm going that extra half step down, because I agree, I don't think it should be below a 5.
Yeah.
I think it's just competent enough and at least interesting enough from a sort of cheesy old school kind of point of view. You know, it's better than, say, Beyond the Time Barrier that we did for extra reels.
Right.
But I think just having talked about it and just talking about all the things that it's just not quite getting right, and just how much my attention was drifting for large stretches because it felt like nothing was happening, I had 5.5. So
okay,
that's what I'm
not
going
gonna argue. But I was honestly between a 6 and a 5.5. I just had to go higher because I don't know.
Yeah,
I can see some people having more fun with it than I did.
Yeah. So there you go. That is Robinson Crusoe on Mars. David will get to his homework in a minute, but I'll do a little bit of plugging. I'll also tell you that next time on the show, we're looking at a sci-fi movie, something we're going to be doing over the rest of the year to an extent. Not every episode, but we're going to try and sprinkle them in. Is we're going to be looking at sci-fi movies from this decade, from 2020s, that we haven't done in the show before. Basically, I went looking for gems, things that just went past me when they came out. So next week, we're looking at a movie called River, which, if I remember correctly, is a Japanese movie that just kind of popped up.
Yes.
And just seemed, it had a really good word of mouth. So I'm like, I don't even, I know very little about it. We're going to go in blind next week and see how it is. So that's what's happening next time on the show. And of course, I said at the start of the review, obviously, you can get bonus content over in patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Me and David do 2 monthly shows over there. We do the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection. We do extra reels, where we review movies that are so bad they're good. At least, hopefully, not always. Sometimes they're just so bad that they're torture. But yeah, it works out different ways depending on the movie. Plus, there's bonus stuff for other shows like Screams After Midnight or Horror Movie Podcast that I do with Tim and other stuff as well. So go and have a look. Patreon, YouTube memberships. Patreon is what I always promote the most because it's the easiest thing to upgrade on and whatnot and everything else. But there's YouTube memberships, there's tipping on YouTube. All these things do help out a bunch. All the support is why I can do this as often as I do and do as many shows as I do. So if you would like to support all the content and help keep it coming, you can do so over there. So David's got a homework movie. I've not no idea what that is. He's not told me. So David, what sci-fi movie did you watch for this week?
So, funny story. Before going into this movie, I try to do my homework movie first with just a vague idea as to what the movie is, because sometimes I go in completely blind. But this one being called Robinson Crusoe in Space, I figured, okay, I got a pretty good idea what Robinson Crusoe is. Turns out I was thinking of Gulliver's Travels. So I just got the wrong concept entirely, but it still kind of worked. So I did Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
I had no idea where you were going with that, but all right.
Yeah. I was thinking, Gulliver's Travels. It's got like all the tiny people when he gets shipwrecked on an island. But turns out that's Gulliver's Travels. That's not Robinson Crusoe. So that's my bad. But it still kind of works because it's like a journey and an expedition trying to survive and all that stuff. So I'm taking the win. Regardless, so much better than this movie.
Oh yeah, so much fun.
So much fun. That's I remember I did definitely watch that probably upwards of 10 years ago now. It's definitely been a long time. I enjoyed it this time through, for sure. There's tons of jokes that I thought were a lot funnier now than I remember them being. Maybe that's just because, growing up, I'm closer to the parents' age than I am the kids now, so more of the parents' humor was landing.
I mean, that may be part of it, but I think part of it all just might be that, some of the humor in it's actually quite witty. There's obviously a lot of humor that works for you when you were a kid, because I did like the movie as a kid, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of jokes in there that are there for the adults that are not because they're crude necessarily. There's a couple that are a little bit edgy, but like for the most part, it's just because they're a little bit more highbrow. They're a little bit more, because when we did this for the show, like a year and a half ago, whenever it was, I hadn't seen it in a long ass time. And I was very pleasantly surprised at how much it held up. Like, it's actually a really good movie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that what it does best is it doesn't just focus on, like, the 2 or 3 character dynamics that you're expecting. Like, obviously, you go into it and you have the older boy and girl and then 2 younger boys. And you're immediately expecting those 2 to pair off. You're expecting it to be solely focused on those 2 during the journey. But they actually do all the different combinations. They show, the 2 brothers, how they talk, the other siblings, how they interact. You see the older sister and the younger brother from the other family. Like, they do the entire split of interactions, which I don't think I've ever really seen done since, where they show every single interaction and how these characters, like, get into it. And it's honestly was refreshing because each of them felt unique in their own right. They each felt like a fully developed character because they took the time to show how everyone talks to each other.
Yeah, and then you get the parents as well, and you get the neighbors' parents, and like they're all interacting quite well.
Yeah. Also, it does a great job of setting up like Chekhov's guns throughout the first just half an hour. It's just like, this is the thing that's going to come back. This is the thing that's going to come back. And you're never quite sure how it's going to come back. But then when it does, you're like, oh yeah, hey, look, even like the tasty cake. Like they show him eating an oatmeal cream pie and it's like, that comes back too. And it's just very good writing the whole way through.
Yeah. Plus
not to even mention the special effects.
Yeah, great practical effects. Like all them traveling through the jungle of the backyard and all just the ideas of, okay, what do we run into in there that could be fun because they're tiny and it'll appear to be huge. So no, it's very inventive, it's very witty. Yeah, it's really good stuff.
Yeah, I will make the argument that if ever a kid manages to drop and lose an entire oatmeal cream pie, that kid needs to like be talked to about how to clean up his messes, because those things are like that big. Like there's no way that you should be able to just lose that in a yard.
I mean, they did mention a lot that they hadn't cut the grass in a long time, so maybe it just...
I mean, I guess, but still, you should just be able to like, oh, I dropped that. How do you ignore the fact that you just dropped an entire tasty cake? I don't get that.
Who knows? Maybe it wasn't the kids. Maybe some filthy litter person was just walking past and just threw it in because they're savages.
I think there's evidence in the movie to argue against that, but fair enough. But no, overall, I did definitely enjoy the movie. I think that it was a solid piece of work there. I do remember this one a lot more than I remember the sequels, but I remember not enjoying the sequels. But I will get to those eventually, I suppose. Yeah, no, I think this one, I'm gonna give it. I'm bouncing between an 8 and an 8.5. So it's good. It's very good. Great, you would say. But like, I think I'm going to stick with the 8. But it's very close to an 8.5.
Okay. No, solid. All right. Well, that'll bring an end to the Atomic Cinema Experiment for the week. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, we got something new and exciting next week, hopefully. Last week we did a big classic. So hopefully you're not too mad that we did this weird 60s movie this week and didn't like it that much. But hey, that's fine. We'll see you next time. Keep watching science fiction and computer ad salsa.